All right, so just by way of review a little bit. Before we watched the movie, we talked about national parks, right? And we talked about this notion of the national symbolic. If you recall, we said that the wilderness idea, this idea that we need wilderness, right, in order to bear our, to deal with, to handle our urban, modern lives, right, our crazy lives. That this idea is developed, right, coextensively with, at the same time as, the invention of photography. Right? And so photography becomes a sort of argument for, right, the development of the wilderness idea and then the actual conservation policies and practices that accompany it. Okay? And I want to introduce another layer to this. Right? I want to introduce this, what we're going to talk about tonight, which is this layer of the idea of the human. So we've got one idea, which is the wilderness idea. And then I want to introduce this second idea, which is the idea of the human. Now you're going to say, wait a minute, these aren't ideas, these are actual things. Wilderness is a thing, right, in the world. Yes? Yes, right? Yes. This is straightforwardly the case, yeah. But at the same time, it's also an idea, right, with a history, with a lot of complexity to it. And it's the idea that we're looking at, right? So, when I say the idea of the human, do I mean that there are no humans? No, right? Yeah. Are there humans? I mean, in a pretty straightforward sense, let's say yes. Right? There are humans. But the human is also an idea. And that's what we're going to talk about, because remember, this is me sneaking philosophy into an environmental class, right? Okay. Remember that a few weeks ago, we talked about this guy, Bill McKibben, and we talked about this book, The End of Nature. That was a New York Times bestseller, and I want to start by giving you a quote from The End of Nature. Okay, have a look at this, please. Let's read this together. We have built a greenhouse. Now, the reason he's talking about a greenhouse is because when we first started talking about climate change, about global warming, there was a lot of talk about the greenhouse effect, right? Greenhouse gases. And McKibben here wants to say, look, this isn't just a metaphor, right? He says, we have actually built a greenhouse, right, around the world, nature, right? A human creation. The italics are his, not mine. Where once there bloomed a sweet and wild garden. There's nothing there except us. This is what's in the greenhouse, he's saying. It's just us. Right? There's no such thing as nature anymore. That other world that isn't business and art and breakfast. I love this as a trio. Business, art, breakfast. There's your life, okay? Welcome to your life. That other world that isn't business and art and breakfast is now not another world, and there's nothing except us alone. At the same time that I felt lonely, he writes, I felt lonely in this place, right, in this greenhouse. At the same time that I felt lonely, though, I felt crowded, without privacy. We go to the woods, in part, to escape. But now, there is nothing but us, and so there is no escaping other people. Okay? This is from The End of Nature. Herzog, the director of Grizzly Man, right, is basically casting Treadwell, Timothy Treadwell, as someone that's in this tradition, right? In the tradition of the great wilderness thinkers, wilderness writers, nature writers, right? Take a look. But Treadwell is not an actor in opposition to a director or a producer, right? Treadwell is not an actor. He's fighting civilization itself. It is the same civilization that cast Thoreau out of Walden and John Muir into the wild. Let's talk about who these guys are in blue here. Thoreau and John Muir. Henry David Thoreau was one of the he was called the group was called the American Transcendentalist Philosophers. These are the first writers to really sort of foreground, right, the importance of nature to life, right, this centrality of nature to life. And Thoreau was actually quite active and operative in that early conservation movement, right, in the mid to late 19th century that we talked about last week. So that's Henry David Thoreau. He wrote a book called Walden, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And John Muir. Now, John Muir was a Scottish immigrant who, by various ways, ended up in California and spent a great deal of his life walking, right, around the California wilderness. Not only, I think he also walked to from Connecticut to Florida or something. He was a walker. Okay, the guy was a walker and a very serious, again, nature writer. Right, he wrote almost mystical kinds of books about his experiences, which were in fact extraordinary because he walked such great distances. And Muir was absolutely central to Yosemite, right, which you guys learned about last week, and that the creation of all of that early policy, the writing of those early California parks into law, right, the creation of the California wilderness, right, as a federal wilderness. So notice, Herzog is saying, we've got Thoreau, we've got John Muir, and we've got Timothy Treadwell. There's some guys in the middle too, right? But Timothy Treadwell is a sort of modern moment, right? A contemporary moment in this already established tradition. Okay. Now, at the same time that you've got these sort of the let's say the champions of wilderness, you've also got critics of the wilderness idea. And the most famous of these critics is someone named William Cronin. In the 90s, Cronin writes, he writes an essay which becomes quite famous in 95. It's called The Trouble with Wilderness. Cronin's thesis is, you can imagine wilderness as this thing that you have to return to, right? Only if you begin from the assumption that humans weren't there in the first place. That there was this thing that was a nature that was free of humans. And only then can you write books like The End of Nature. Like this idea, oh no, there's no one there but us, right? Or books like Thoreau and Muir wrote, right, about a kind of nature that we have to return to because we're losing this essential part of ourselves. Right, so take a look. Cronin's thesis is that what's actually the case is that humans have always shaped their environment.
Humans have always been in nature. There was never a nature that wasn't shaped by humans, as long as humans have been on Earth. Okay? So the whole idea of wilderness, the whole idea of nature for Cronin begins from a false assumption. Okay, I want to share with you a few questions that he asks, right? So take a look at this. Here is his first question. Why is the wilderness experience so often conceived as a form of recreation best enjoyed by those whose class privileges give them the time and resources to leave their jobs behind and get away from it all? Right? In other words, he says, isn't it interesting that those who get to really enjoy wilderness are the people who have enough money, right, to take some time off, go on holiday, buy the gear, buy the right shoes, buy the skis, buy whatever, right, buy the, I don't know, horseback riding lessons, and go into the wilderness. Second question. Why does the protection of wilderness so often seem to pit urban recreationists, which are the people we just described, against rural people? What does this word mean? Rural?
Those who do not live in cities.
Those who do not live in the cities, right? Good. Right? So, urban recreationists against rural people who actually earn their living from the land. Right? Why is it that when we're arguing over, like, think about Alaska, right, that I've already talked about. Why is it that when we're fighting over sort of this question of protecting the land, it's like guys with awesome hiking gear, who are leaving their, computer jobs, versus actual farmers, right? The farmers don't want the national parks. The guys with the awesome gear do want the national parks. He's saying this tells us there is something not real here, right? Why in the debates about pristine means clean, right? In the debates about pristine natural areas are, quote, primitive peoples idealized, even sentimentalized, until the moment they do something unprimitive, modern, and unnatural, and thereby fall from environmental grace. Right? So, he's basically saying, yes, the enthusiasts of wilderness, they love, right, some Native American people. They love indigenous people. They love First Nations people, until those First Nations people don't want their national parks anymore. Until they say, this is nonsense. I'm not interested in your rock climbing hobby, right? And then we're not friends, he says. So, one of the things he wants us to see when we look at these kinds of questions is that there are all these complexities and disagreements around wilderness. That he says the weirdness of this gets lost when we just say human, non-human, right? When we say there are these two, which is what McKibben wants to say, right? There's this human, and then there's this nature that we lost. That division, right? That binary opposition loses all of this nuance. Okay? And here is another quote from Cronin. Excuse me. Far from being the one place on earth that stands apart from humanity, it, wilderness, or nature, right, is quite profoundly a human creation. Indeed, the creation of very particular human cultures at very particular moments in human history. It is not a pristine sanctuary where the last remnant of an untouched, endangered, but still transcendent nature can, for at least a little while longer, be encountered without the contaminating taint of civilization. You guys know this word taint? You know the song Tainted Love? Right, the taint is the stain, right? It makes something dirty. Instead, wilderness, is a product of that civilization and could hardly be contaminated by the very stuff of which it is made. Wilderness hides its unnaturalness behind a mask that is all the more beguiling because it seems so natural. Do you guys know this word beguiling? Anybody? If something is beguiling, it is, I bet you can figure it out from the context. Right? If something is beguiling, it is
Like appealing?
like a
Appealing.
appealing. Yes, right? It draws you in, it pulls you in. It's all the more attractive, it's all the more compelling because it appears so transparent, right? It appears so natural.
What does he mean by the very stuff of which it is made?
The very stuff of which it is made. What does he mean? Good. Let's look at that sentence, yeah?
Oh, here.
Sorry, I have to...
Refers to civilization.
And could hardly be contaminated by the very stuff of which it is made, right? I mean, if wilderness is made by humans, then humans can't taint it, right? They can't make it dirty with their humanness. They can't infect it with their terrible humanness because they have always been shaping the wilderness. There was never any wilderness. And in fact, and I didn't put this here, but Cronin says at the end of this, he says the idea of wilderness is, he says today, one of or the greatest obstacle to responsible environmentalism. This is what he says. Right? Because it allows us to believe that there is this other place that we can go. That we can leave this, this mess, right, that we have here, and just go somewhere else where there is still something, right, redemptive, something pure, something true. And as long as we believe that, Cronin says, we're not going to clean up this mess. As long as we keep giving ourselves, and again, who is us? Because notice, for him, the us is the rich people who can take holiday from their jobs and go cross-country skiing, right? Who is the us? Not everybody. But as long as they/we can go and take our fantastic holidays, we don't have to worry about what's happening at home. Or we can blame it on someone else. Because we go off to our national parks and take our photographs and post them to Instagram, and we are fabulous. Everything is great. Okay? Questions so far? How are we doing? Are you with me?
Yeah.
You guys look great. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I only say that so I can hear that back. Okay, so how does this happen, right? So I'm as you know, I'm fascinated by this process. How does it become so natural? How is it that we keep getting away with this idea that nature just is? Yeah. I want to introduce you to this idea of spectacle that we'll be working with for the rest of the class quite a bit. What is meant by spectacle? It's a word that we use quite a bit as if we all knew what it meant, but it has a very specific history. in media theory and in cultural theory, cultural studies. Excuse me. So I'll give you just a couple of names. There is a German journalist and writer and cultural theorist named Siegfried Kracauer, who already in 1927, look at how long ago this was, right? Almost 100 years ago. Already in 1927, he writes a book called The Mass Ornament. Right? The Mass Ornament is a study of the idea. He's actually very interested in theater and how theater works, but not theater as drama, not the play. He's interested in things like dancing girls, right? Or what's appearing more and more on stage are these sort of mechanized spectacles, right? Think of New York City, the Rockettes, right? Think of the Rockettes at Radio City Music Hall, if this means anything to you guys. The women standing with their arms around each other, kicking their legs up like this. I'm so glad there's not a camera on it. Right? And they are doing it in perfect unison, right? Like a machine. Kracauer was very interested in this phenomenon. Right? Why? Because he says, what the hell are we looking at? Right? I mean, we're looking at some legs, maybe, right? But the spectacle that we're talking about is not exactly pornographic, and it's not just the admiration of beautiful legs. We're admiring something else, right? We're admiring this machinic movement, the perfect synchronicity, right? And what he's very interested in is how it sort of unites the audience, right, as a social unit. For him, there was something very specific about that. A whole massive theater full of people looking at basically nothing and applauding. And they're just delighted, right? These were just events of delight. You see this thing and you know you're supposed to applaud. You know it is to please, of course it pleases you. Even though, it's kind of a bunch of nothing. So, Kracauer is the first person to talk about spectacle as a form of social organization and means of control, right? Why is that interesting to Kracauer? Well, it's Germany, and it's 1927. Right? So he's already talking about, and he wrote a great deal about the rise of Nazism, not just as a sort of thing that was happening from outside to people, right? But remember, we talked about the national symbolic, we talked about those feelings that come up from within us. Why is it that we become docile? Why is it that we find ourselves complying with certain things? Because sometimes it actually just feels good. Right? So he was already theorizing that. And he coined this term, the distraction industries. Entertainment, your dancing girls, was one distraction industry, but tourism was another. Right? One of the ways to not think about your life, your actual life, and the Nazi party taking over your country and the world, one of the ways to not think about it is to go on holiday. Right? And then tourism, again, as spectacle, so that I go on holiday, not just to sort of, sleep and eat, but to watch, to see, right? And the tour group comes here together, and they are presented a certain moment, a certain snapshot, right? Of a society, or a village, or a place, or some wild animals, or something like this. So that's Kracauer. And then the other big theorist of spectacle is Guy Debord, who writes a book called The Society of the Spectacle, which was published in 1967. And Debord says, spectacle is not a collection of images, but a relation among people, arising when reality can no longer be grasped directly. Okay? When reality can no longer be grasped directly. He was De Boer was very interested in this notion that social life, already in 1967, by the time we're talking about, the age of television, right, that social life is going to hell. We are losing the social. It's being replaced by something else. Right? And this something else is what he called spectacle. Right? So spectacle wasn't just this thing that happened sometimes for De Boer. He called us, or people in the 1960s, the society of the spectacle. I'm very interested, right? One might ask, what would De Boer say today about social life, representation, images, right? Docility, all of that stuff. Okay? So, what interests me about Grizzly Man is all of those moments. So, if we sort of think about it, there's this tradition of thinking about spectacle and the relationship between spectacle and the real. Right? These guys often talk about the production of the real. That the real is this thing that gets created. It's not just the stuff that is. Right? And if this seems really strange to you, I have you for a whole 6 more weeks. Right? So that we can really get comfortable with this idea. Think about what happens in Grizzly Man. How many times the people argue about what is real. Right? So I have some stills for you. Remember this guy? He is one of the environmentalists, right? And he gets those letters from the angry Alaskans who hate environmentalists. And the letter says, oh yeah, go and fix your environment, go and preserve your environment. Who cares about reality? Right, so that's one of those moments. Right? Here's another moment. Remember when the bear ecologist, the guy with the beard who kind of talks like this, the guy with the beard, he says, yeah, we might be interested in being like bears, but the reality is that we can never be with the bears. Right? The truth is, we are not like them. So it's all this stuff about the real. Here's another choice moment. Remember this guy? The guy who says Timothy Treadwell got what he was asking for. He got what he deserved. He got what he deserved. He deserved to die. Right? He deserved to die. And this guy says, he was acting like he thought people were out there wearing bear costumes. So again, he deserved to die because he just got reality wrong. And so there's this very interesting question, ongoing conversation about what is real, right? And who gets to say what is real, what is actually happening. Okay. So a couple of other things. So here's another quote from De Boer, Society of the Spectacle. De Boer writes about the tautological character of spectacle. Who knows this word? Tautological. Repeating, so it's kind of like repeating, but it's even stronger than that. What does tautology mean? You have the same word in Russian. What does it mean? No, I understand.
It's similar ideas.
Say something in another word.
Similar ideas.
To say that something is another word. Okay, we're getting closer. Somebody tell me what it is. Yes.
Using words with similar roots nearby.
Using words with similar roots nearby. Who else? Who wants to? Let's keep talking. Let's keep doing this. Tautology. Tell me what a tautology. Give me an example. Sorry?
Life is what you live.
Life is what you live. Fantastic. Right? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yes. Life is what you live. Perfect. Perfect example of a tautology. What have I just said? Did you learn something from what I just said? No, right? That's the nature of tautology is it doesn't actually have any content to it, right? So the tautological character of the spectacle. Remember Cronin saying, wilderness, nature, right, is all the more beguiling because it appears so natural, right? Spectacle serves as its own evidence all the time, right? The moment you say, well, maybe things aren't like this, all the other person has to say is, but look, right? And that's it. That's their argument, right? So Debord, this is a quote from Debord, the true is a moment of the false. The true, which is the evidence, right, becomes just a moment in the construction and creation of something. This is how so spectacle has a kind of logic to it. Okay? Again, if all of this seems utterly bizarre, give me 6 more weeks. Yeah, right? We're gonna have this by the end of this quarter. So that's Debord. Here is another French philosopher, more recent. Alain Badiou talks about the passion for the real. Think about our arguments about, for example, climate change. Right? The arguments about climate change are very interesting when you look at how they are shaped rhetorically. It's all people saying, well, those guys just don't know what reality is. They just don't get what's really going on. And the other side says, no, those guys don't get what's really going on. And these guys say, but I have science on my side. And the other guys say, but I have science on my side. Right? And everyone is pointing to this real. Right? So Alain Badiou talks about the passion for the real, which he defines as an empty center. There's nothing there, right? But we organize political mobilization around it. Right? And then finally, a quote from Slavoj Žižek, one of the most famous living philosophers, arguably one of the most famous public intellectuals, right now. Žižek talks about the effect of the real. That repeated, here's your repetition, right? Repeated efforts to show the real, right? We want to keep showing it over and over and over. That this becomes what he calls an instrument of ideology. Okay? And so here is another moment when the helicopter pilot says about Tim Treadwell, I think he had lost sight of what was really going on, right? He thought it was people in bear costumes, but the reality is different. Okay. But what we see in the writings of all of the early environmentalists is exactly this same idea, right, of the real. The early nature writers, when they write about nature and why they go, almost all, I don't want to say all, but in my experience, all of them say, I go because there is something real there. There is a truth, right, about the human there. I want to give you guys a quote from that book by Thoreau. Remember Henry David Thoreau? So Thoreau writes Walden, and Walden is from 1854. Does anyone remember from last week when Central Park is designed? Bark was designed?
1857.
1857, good. Right? So at exactly the same time, right, that we've got this large-scale conversation about urban parks, Central Park. Olmsted is involved in conserving the Yosemite wilderness also, right? Thoreau builds this cabin in the woods and writes this book about what it's like to live completely sort of free of civilization, free of the trappings of civilization. And I want to show you guys this quote. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I will resign myself if that's actually the true state of affairs. But only then, right? I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. What's marrow?
It's my brain. I don't know. It's direct meaning.
It's not quite the direct meaning. What's marrow? Where is marrow? Inside your bones. Good. Excellent. And suck all the marrow out of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life. By the way, all that was not life is what he considered civilization to be, right? To cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms, right? To distill it to its purest truth. And if it proved to be mean, why then, to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world. Or, if it were sublime, to know it by experience, to be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion. Right, so this idea that in the wilderness there is a truth of things that we can get at if we are just sort of brave enough, right, to go and really do it. That we can sort of strip ourselves of all the stuff and get to some truth of things. Excuse me. Okay. So, all right. It's here that we can talk about this notion of that borderline that comes up in the film a lot, right? You saw the film, you saw people saying over and over that Treadwell crossed a line. So I'm interested in the relationship between this desire for the truth, right, and this line, this invisible line. So, of course, here's a quote from Herzog. Alina, can I ask you for some water? Because sorry. As if there was a desire in him to leave the confines of his humanness and bond with the bears, Treadwell reached out and sought a primordial encounter. But in doing so, he crossed an invisible borderline. Fantastic. Thanks. And here, of course, is Sven Haakenson, the director of the Alutiiq Museum, the one Native American person, right, shown in the film. And for us on the island, you don't do that. You don't invade on their territory. For him to act like a bear the way he did, to me it was the ultimate in disrespecting the bear and what the bear represents. I think he did more damage to the bear because when you habituate the bears to humans, they think they are safe. So notice once again this idea that there is a truth which Treadwell got wrong. Right? The bears think they are safe. But wait a minute. Were the bears safe with him? No. Was he going to do something to the bears? So were the bears safe? With him. Were the bears safe? No. No, he was bad. What was he going to do to the bears?
Certainly
without
he
him,
wouldn't do anything, but other humans.
Other humans, but other humans. But notice, right? It's interesting to that we, he would say, Treadwell would say, other humans. That's other humans' problem. If the bears think they are safe with him, it's because they were actually safe with him. Otherwise, they would have eaten him a long time before. Right? Or killed him or something. Right? So, when you habituate the bears to humans, they think they are safe. Timothy Treadwell crossed the boundaries, the boundary that we have lived with for 7,000 years. Okay, so I want to show you, there's this still here. Then I want to introduce the work of a good friend of mine who works on this film. His name is Dominic Petman. And he talks about how the film presents Treadwell as a careless ontological tourist. Let's talk about this word ontological. It's a very fancy philosophy word. Philosophers like to use completely unnecessarily complicated words for no reason. Right? So we are here to demystify those as much as is possible. This word ontological, ontology, right? It has to do with being, right? But especially in this case, with different modes of being. So the idea is that there is something like, human being, which is more than just how many chromosomes make up Homo sapiens, right? There's something like human being. But there is also something like bear being. And bear being and human being are not the same. Right? So when people keep talking about this boundary that he crossed, right? It was as if he just didn't understand that there was a special mode of being that is human being, and he needs to stay in here and not go over there. Right? That he sort of got it wrong, that he was a careless tourist flitting about different modes of being. And yet, our bear ecologist, remember him? Beardo, right? Our bear ecologist points out, I think in spite of himself, he doesn't mean to point this out, but he points out that lots of people have this problem, not just Timothy Treadwell. Right? He talks about, he says, when you go out, when you are with the bears, when you spend a lot of time with the bears, something happens to you. This mysterious siren song, right? A calling. Who's calling? What's going on here? Right? A siren song, a calling. There is that desire to get into their world. This is when he says it's a simpler world. It's a beautiful world. And then he says, but we cannot. We cannot. We are different. I need you to please turn off your phone. Thank you. And I think another moment like this, right? Remember the Aleutic Museum? Remember before the director of the museum starts talking about how well, it's too bad. Timothy Treadwell died and his girlfriend died. Shrug, but basically he got what he deserved because he crossed the boundary. What was happening before that? Do you remember? What's behind him? Someone stole the bear hand, right? And Herzog says, we visited the Alutiiq Museum, which had recently been raided by tourists out of control. Right? And Hackinson says, somebody wanted it so much that they cut the paw off, they stole it from here. Right? So, who is this? So it's not just Treadwell that has sort of inappropriate desires, inappropriate, ontological things going on with him, right? In the background of the film, there's this kind of murmur that other people have this problem too. So, the second thing I'd like to talk about is the confessional aspect of this film. So we talked about the spectacular aspect, we talked about spectacle, and now I want to talk about confession. Okay, so what do we see here? Timothy Treadwell. And what? What does he have? He has a camera. But wait, who is filming him? A camera. Right? So we have this interesting moment here where he is filming himself filming. Right? There are all these sort of layers of mediation and of telling the story of himself. So let's talk about confession. What is a confession? What things have to be there in order for something to be a confession? Sincerity. Good. What else? Truth. What else? Guilt. You were bad. Right? Sure. Absolutely. But what else? Can I just walk down? Look, I'm going to walk down the street, and I'm sincere, and I'm definitely guilty, right? So I'm sincere. I'm going to just walk down the street and, talk to myself. Is that a confession? I need a church. Do I need What do I need from the church? What do I need?
Someone listens.
I need someone to be listening. Sorry? Mercy comes later. Hold on. Mercy, only if I deserve it. It's unclear still.
Trust the person you confess to.
I need to trust the person I confess to, right? And that comes with the sincerity and the truth.
You need the God.
I need God. Okay? Is it just God that I need?
Depends on what you need.
Is it between me and God? Is this a conversation between me and God, or do I need someone else? I need what? Who want to listen, who aren't supposed to listen. I need, so it's a little bit unclear, right? Is it just, it's sort of, of course these are all, I'm speaking in very broad terms, these are things that theologians have debated for, millennia, right? Is it something that's between me and God, or do I need a witness? Do I need someone else, right, who is going to take up the weight, right, of my guilt? Who does Timothy Treadwell talk to? Who is he talking to? Himself. You think? Is he talking to himself? He's talking to the camera. To the people behind you, right?
Yeah, personally. People believe that nature is something, somehow something is
the people that he wants to convince, right, that this is a safe and beautiful and perfect world, right? What else? When you go into the church, let's go back to church for a minute. When you go into the church, do I just stand in the church and I'm like, God, I was so bad? No? No. What do I do?
Priest should
The priest?
person
The
Right.
privacy. Privacy, okay. Yes, right, so there's this interesting tension, right, between I need a witness and I need privacy. Right, these are both the case, right? So here is Treadwell talking for hours and hours and hours about very personal things, right? Very intimate things to the camera. He's talking to the camera. He's talking to his viewers. We don't know. It's unclear. Probably not, right? He's talking to the camera at the same time that he keeps insisting on how alone he is. And that he needs this story of how alone he is. The story, he says, this will only work if I can show people how alone I am in the wilderness. Right? Yes, Sergey.
During the movie, he said that he had a problem with society. Maybe for him it was kind of diary during this long time something arrived in the relationship.
A kind of a diary? Yeah, but it's interesting. Absolutely. I mean, clearly that is true, right? But it's interesting that people who go to these places and seek out these kinds of experiences often end up keeping very long and detailed records. Right? From Robinson Crusoe, who is a fictional character, right, to Timothy Treadwell, to Chris McCandless and Into the Wild, if you know this film. And if you don't, I will talk about it at length anyway. But maybe some of you know this film, right, about the boy who goes off to Alaska, and this is a true story, right, and then ends up dying, right, in Alaska. We found out later, this is not really shown in the film so much, but he took over 400 photographs of himself. And this was before digital photography. Right? So he went as far as he could, completely away from people. Didn't want people. Burned his money. Everyone lost track of him. He ran away completely, right? Except for the part where he kept taking photographs of himself. So this confessional mode, right? It requires privacy. Okay, so we've got, here is Treadwell, how alone you are. Now, what things does he talk about when he confesses?
that he loves bears.
That he loves the bears. I love you, I love you, I love you. He loves the bears.
As foxes.
What else? What are those moments in the film where you kind of feel like it's a little bit too much? Like you're hearing something that's a little like, I don't know if I need to know that about you. When he touched the bear poop, fantastic moment. Yes, absolutely wonderful moment, right? Yeah.
And when he talked about his problems with girls.
When he talks about his problems with girls, right? His problems with girls, right? It's not really working out in my love life. What else? Yes.
When he talked with Fox about his alcohol addiction.
Absolutely. When he talks with the fox, and he's like, well, Mr. Fox, here's how it was. I drank a lot, Talks about his alcohol addiction. Good. Right? Those moments when we see him cry, right? He cries. He says, I was going to die. I would have died. I had no life. I was a total asshole. I had nothing. I had no life. These animals gave me a life, right? And then he says, thank you for these animals? Right? Whom is he thinking? Whom is he thanking, right? It's sort of unclear. He's not just thanking the animals. He keeps, there's this ongoing conversation with something else, someone else. Thank you for these animals. They gave me a life, right? The miracle was animals. Now.
And he always
Yes.
repeats the same ideas, like the same things. At first, it seems like, okay, well, it's fine maybe to repeat, but then he gives to me all the time.
3 times.
As if he wants to prove something to himself.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting, sort of, as a study, right? As a study of what can happen. Now, the stuff about sex. Oh, let's go back to the poop. What do we do with the poop moment? What do you guys think about the poop moment? Strange. Was it? He doesn't think it's strange. I mean, he knows that you're going to think it's strange, right? He says, it may seem strange, but then he says, of course I touched it. Right? I love her. This was inside her. Right? There's something is happening here that's not just, this is somehow related to the problems with girls moment. Right? We're hearing a little bit too much. Remember, I don't know if this was clear to you when he says, I'm really good in the, you know what? Remember when he said this? Yeah? Right? He won't say explicitly, but this is what he means, right? He says, I know I am, they know I am. Right? I'm really good in bed. I don't know why girls don't want to stay with me long term. Right? We suddenly get this narrative, right, about sex, right? But there are these moments where it kind of overflows itself. The poop moment is a fantastic moment of this. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because on Monday, we are going to be talking about queering ecology. Right? So we're going to be talking about what we mean by sex as nature, right? And natural sex, the idea that there is natural sex or unnatural sex, or that sex can be perverted, right? So we'll talk about these things on Monday a little bit. And I think Grizzly Man, it sort of has a really wonderful moment, right? Where sex becomes this kind of unstable, kind of trembling thing. Where, of course, you knew somewhere, by the time he starts talking about his sex life, we're like, of course. Of course, this weirdo is going to start talking about his sex life. Great. I really need to know this too much information. Thank you very much. Right? It becomes sort of inevitable. And then, of course, but you know what? Alas, Timothy Treadwell is not gay. Bummer. Right? This is also a very interesting moment in the film, which I'll talk about on Monday, that he says it over and over again. Now, what do we typically think when people are like, I'm so not gay? Sure you're not. Sure. I know. It's okay. Yeah, sure. Right? It's an interesting moment. The more he says it, the more we're like, oh my God, he's totally gay. Right? So again, it's this sort of this sex as this very sort of central to how the central category to how we imagine the human. So we've got his drinking, we've got his not having a life, his depression, right? We've got his sexuality, his maybe kind of pervy sexuality with the poop, right? We don't know. He's really into the poop, and not just as a scientist. Right? We've got his, I'm so not gay, I'm super not gay. Too bad I'm not gay. I wish I were gay, but I'm not. Oops, right? And then there's another moment that feels, what else? Tell me, what else do we feel like it's just too much? We're hearing too much. We're learning something intimate that we don't need to know.
For me, he says such more times, "Thank you for being my friend," to animals.
And
For me, I feel something wrong.
Why? Tell us why.
It's strange. That's a normal from my mind. It's not going
What?
to be so. Thank you for being my friend.
What's weird about thank you for being my friend?
You don't have to thank people.
You shouldn't have to thank people. If you're thanking them, then maybe they're not your friends. Or, I don't know, there's some kind of display here of your loneliness, your patheticness, right? Something like that. What else? What else is kind of too much information?
For me,
Yes.
it was the part where he talks about his relation to the park service, how much he hates them.
That was terrible.
He repeats that over and over and starts cursing, then switches to talking about how he is great and how he is gonna beat the rest.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That was kind of
You want this not to be true, right? What else? Good. What else? Thank you.
He always wanted to die during all the movie because I remember the moment when he said said that this is a dangerous place ever in the world.
Yes.
You die here.
You die here.
You absolutely die here.
Good.
And you must find the way how to survive, and I know how to survive. That's why you must try to die. It's you.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. The times when he's talking about his own death, or that we know that he has died, right? There's something grotesque, right, about when he talks about death, the talking about his death. Then we, of course, get all the details of the death. Like, we need to know this. I hauled 4 garbage bags of humans out of that bear. It's just this constant, grotesque, almost obsessive. The film itself has this obsession, right, with the death. And my favorite moment, this one, the audio tape, right? The audio tape that Herzog listens to, but she doesn't. But it's happening in real time. Herzog is listening to it for the first time in real time, not quite on camera because the camera's right behind his head. It's as if we are witnessing the death itself at that moment, but we can't have access to it, right? There's this access distance, right? And then she says, now you know why no one's going to hear the tape, right? But of course, what is this? 2,730,857 views of the audio of the bear attack on YouTube. Yes?
I want to mention that on Monday when I got home, I wanted to look at more information about
Yes.
Timothy Treadwell.
Yes.
The most popular
Hit.
Google was Timothy Treadwell audio tape of death.
Yes.
The more popular.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, right? And look at what it's here with.
isn't fake.
I don't know. Good. I was hoping someone would ask or someone would tell me.
I have listened to it before lecture.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
You're not sure it's real?
That it isn't fake.
Well, how would we know? This is the problem, right? How would we know that it's a fake? I don't know.
Read comments.
Read the comments. Yeah, if that's where you get your information, Sasha, we have problems. Okay? All right. So, right, then I want to give you guys a quote here from Petman, from the Petman book. The book is called Human Error. It's a long quote, so bear with me here. And this is a quote about Amy Huguenard. This is the person we haven't talked about yet. The long-suffering, mysterious, this absolute sort of blank spot of a girlfriend. In reviews of the film, Huguenard, so Amy, right, is often cast as a sacrificial victim of Treadwell's impassioned obsessions and charismatic delusions. He left several adoring and grieving women in his wake, which does nothing to dilute the homosexual hypothesis. However, this reading of Huguenard, reading her as a victim, robs this enigmatic figure of any agency or intelligence. She made the decision to accompany and stay with Treadwell, despite the misgivings in her diary. Her death is indeed terrible, especially as it lacks the pathos, coherence, and seeming inevitability of that of her companion. And yet, she was a woman who clearly understood the risks of living in the Grizzly maze. Moreover, her documented fear of bears suggests that the attraction to Treadwell was even stronger. In any case, Huguenard both complicates and reinforces the semiotic square that I'm attempting to set up between sex, death, confession, and spectacle, since she clearly shied away from the last two, confession and spectacle, to morally support Treadwell's embrace of all four. Okay? So, let's look at this semiotic square. I'm not going to go too much into why semiotic square, what it means. I don't really care. It's a tool used by structuralists in the early 20th century, where you have terms that are opposed to each other, like spectacle and confession, and death and sex, for example, right? In a different kind of relationship where they sort of give each other mutual meaning. So you can. That's all we need to know for now, right? You can see that sex and confession have something to do with each other. Yes? But sex and death also have something to do with each other. Spectacle and confession also have something to do with each other, as does spectacle and death, right? YouTube tape. As does spectacle and sex, certainly, right? And confession and death. So, for Petman, what Grizzly Man is about, right, is how these four things relate to each other, give meaning to each other, and start to fill out, right, this notion of the human. Okay? Now, I want to talk about bears just for one moment. Because that's one thing we haven't talked about yet. How are these images different? Hands, please. How are these images different? What are we looking at? What are the differences? Yes?
Well, at the first picture, you can see a strong animal, like a warrior, and on the second, most the opposite side of it, like he's slavered and made to do some ridiculous things, and that's totally different.
Totally different, yeah. So we've got this interesting contrast in how bears are imagined. Right? How bears are imagined in over the history, right, of civilization, how they are imagined. They are often very masculine figures, warrior figures, right? But sometimes they are feminine figures, right? I want to give you guys a short list of things that I found in Dominic's book of how our relationship to bears has changed over time, right? Cultural relationship. The Tlingit people in Alaska thought that bears understood human language and would avenge themselves if they ever overheard you saying something bad about them. So when you talked about bears, among these people, when you talked about bears, you had to whisper. Most North American Indian tribes consider bears a type of people, which is quite easy to do because they can walk upright. Right? Consider bears a type of people with special powers. Scandinavian cultures were very interested in bears. The Finno-Ugrian people thought that bears were half human. Both Scandinavian and North American First Nations cultures have legends of women marrying bears and having children with them. And their highest lineages, right, of families or clans are traced back to these human-bear couplings, these legendary human-bear couplings. Right? So all of this stuff is very positive. Right? Some Native American tribes refuse to eat bear meat because to do so is to eat their ancestors. But then we see this relationship change, right, so that at a certain moment we end up with this kind of figure. On the way to this, we have all kinds of stories in which the bear is an animal to be feared and controlled, right? So I've got here Roman Emperor Caligula stained the Colosseum with the blood of 400 bears, all killed in one day. Right, to show everyone their power. So, the point here is that when we realize that the bear is also a sort of totem animal, right? An animal, and what is a totem animal? A totem animal, and many animals actually fill this function. It's not just that we have a relationship with the totem animal, but that the totem animal somehow mediates the relationship that we have with ourselves. Right? That human beings have with themselves when they imagine themselves to be a particular kind of creature. Okay? So, here is Dominic Hetman again. Bears thus have a special relationship not only to humans, but to the highly spectacular and mediated relationship humans have with themselves. All right, I'm going to conclude with this that Dominic says about this idea of the human that I said we were going to start talking about. Where is the human? He's not interested in what is the human. He doesn't think there's any answer to this. Right? Newsflash. But where is the human? Is it something that flares up during moments of compassion, right? When we say, come on, find your inner humanity. Flares up during moments of compassion only to disappear when self-interests are compromised? Is it an ontological, there's that word again, ontological property, right? A sort of inner being. Is it an ontological property found nested within condominiums or slums or space stations or caves? Or, and this is him showing you his position, right? Or is it an unstable element that needs precise criteria and conditions to emerge? Does it in fact cut across current taxonomic species lines, as happens when we seem to communicate with dogs, horses, or elephants? You've had this experience, I'm sure, right? Hold on, I'll read the rest in a minute. But can dogs speak? I've got to know. Okay. Can dogs speak?
did we understand?
Have you ever had the experience of communicating with a dog?
Yes.
Well, I didn't ask. Well, I don't care. I don't know words. I don't know. It's a different problem. Have you ever had the experience of communicating with a dog? Yes. Right? Can dogs speak?
Yes.
Wait a minute. I thought the answer was no. Right? I'm very. I will give away my secret here. My great secret of my life is I am obsessed with this question, and the answer is yes and no. Right? That's why it's a good question. Because if I say dogs can't speak, you will all agree with me. That's right, dogs cannot speak. Correct. If I say dogs can speak, you will also all agree with me and say, yes, you're right, dogs can speak. Right? That's how we know it's an interesting and bizarre question, that there's something there for future philosophers to explore, right? So, does it in fact cut across current taxonomic species lines as what happens when we seem to communicate with dogs, horses, or elephants? Are we, as the philosophers might ask, merely simulating these conditions of emergence in a controlled experiment called humanity? Right? Moreover, is that which we call the human really confined to the invisible souls of Homo sapiens? Is it projected onto the historical development of these souls, as that historical development is relentlessly figured, shown in speech, text, and moving image? Right? So for Dominic, the human is something that we sort of perform over and over in speech, text, and moving an image, or moving image, right? As these creatures that we are, as these animals that we are, sort of lumber through history, right? As we kind of stumble gracelessly through time. Right? So that's what the human is. And for Dominic, Grizzly Man is a great kind of performance of this, of the instability of the notion of the human. It's essential instability, right? So it's really not, for Dominic, it's really not a movie about bears. And it's really not a movie about a guy, right? It's a movie about us. It's a movie about us and how we are constantly, and the reason that in the movie we, including Herzog, including the director at the end, he's like, no, really, he crossed a boundary and there is nature. And the bears are just animals, you know. Too bad he died. Even he has to say, there is a reality here, there is a truth here, there is a real boundary here. Right? When he says, when I look at the bears, all I see is a half-bored interest in food. I don't see anything special there. So even he has to kind of stabilize this unstable thing. But what Treadwell is this spectacular performance of the instability of the category of the human. That it needs very precise conditions in order to emerge. Most of us are living in those conditions at most times. Right? Sometimes we aren't living in those conditions. Sometimes things happen to knock us off our balance, and that's when we are constantly told to get back in your human box. Right? Am I making any sense at all? Yeah? I love that answer. Thank you. Even if it's not true. Okay. So, let me see. How are we doing, guys? You guys are amazing. Questions. Questions. Despair. Total disagreement. Yes, I forgot your name. I'm sorry. Anna.
So maybe a bit broader question, but still, all of this like from the philosophical point of view, right?
Yes.
And then at which point then these people, or in general, like, where does the biology step in? I mean, we can all discuss it.
About
like brain things and all the research and everything. So we can easily fix it. I mean, just saying, putting this order just from the biological point of view. But
absolutely.
I don't know if it's really considered.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, of course. I remember when I first proposed at my old job, when I first proposed to teach a philosophy class about animals. And I had to walk in front of all these professors of all the different departments. And they said, what is your proposal? And I said, I would like to teach a class in which I ask the question, what is an animal? And the biologist said, I can answer your question. You don't need a whole class. I can answer your question, right? Yes, absolutely. Biology has its own answers to these things, right? But when we watch a film like Grizzly Man, the easy answer is he was crazy, right? And he was. We know from everything, he was unstable, he was on drugs, he maybe was closeted gay, we don't know, but that'll make you crazy, right, by itself. He was living out in the wilderness, and that'll make me crazy right there, right? All of this stuff, we can explain it all away, right? And we can say, there's something wrong with him. We're okay. Something wrong with him, right? When we do that, we miss the point, right? Herzog wants us to think. We miss the point. And what we miss is that there is something going on here that isn't reducible to any of these explanations.
I just trying to figure out how you need to balance this. I mean, knowing both sides, you have to sort of decide, well, maybe not decide, but at least consider all the options and then,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we are in, no one is saying that there is no such thing as Homo sapiens, right? I haven't said that yet. No one is saying that there's no such thing as Homo sapiens, sure, but when we're talking about the human, or when we say something like, I don't know, Hitler, Stalin, they just weren't human. We mean something else. And then we're not talking about biology. We're talking about ideas. When we say it, if we say it to each other, and we think we know what we mean by that, we're having a conversation, right? We talk about something like the human element. What is this? It's not nothing, because we all think we know what we mean, right? It's not nothing, and yet, what Dominic wants us to see, I keep calling him Dominic because he's one of my best friends. What Petman wants us to see is that it's unstable. It's unstable, it emerges in particular conditions, it changes over the course of history, it changes with different cultures. What it means to be human. Okay? Thank you for that question. I was dreading that question, and I knew someone would ask it. I was secretly hoping someone would ask it. Because it reminds me of that moment when the biologist said, I can answer your horrible question, what is an animal? Next semester we'll be doing the what is an animal class. Sorry, guys. Do you guys like Timothy Treadwell? Do you hate Timothy Treadwell? Every time I show this in the United States, my students hate him. They think he's just terrible. They're really angry that he moved those rocks so that the salmon could swim. Because how can you touch a national park? It's so perfect the way it is. You can't move it, right? It's very interesting. We have all these reactions, right, to this. I've now seen the film, I don't know how many times, 10 times, right? And every time I have a different reaction to it. The first time I saw it, I was very uncomfortable watching him cry. Right? I thought, I'm looking at mental illness, and I don't want, it's his private thing, right? I'm looking at mania or something, like some kind of bipolar disorder, and I don't want to see this. It's for him. It's not for me. Like, now, I'm just like super happy when he's crying. I'm like, I'm crying too. It's my own problem. What are we doing on Monday, guys? Who knows what we're doing on Monday? Discussing ecofeminism and queer ecology. Yes. Which will have everything to do with this. I mean, I'm speaking in broad strokes, but we'll talk a little bit about, yeah, what's up with those women? We'll get back into Grizzly Men. We'll now talk about all the weeping women in the background, right? The girlfriend, the homosexual hypothesis, right? And we'll slowly start talking about what is meant by these new, relatively new movements in environmental theory, ecofeminism, and queer ecology, which is even newer. Right? We'll do that. We are meeting in this room. The cameras will be back. The microphones will be here, so get ready, right? Put on some nice clothes, guys, because you're all going to be on TV. A quick announcement. So, because we have a problem with people coming in late, and that's because SAS has classes until 7, we're going to let those classes out 10 minutes earlier. Okay, so you'll get some kind of announcement about this. This class will begin at 7 p.m. That door will be locked at 7:05. 7:05. So smoke your cigarettes really quickly. Okay? Speed smoking. That door will be locked at 7:05. Okay? Who needs a syllabus? They're on the table. Sign in, please. Yes?
Gone.
Gone? It's just who? What happened to? What did you do to it?
Never came here.
Never came here. Well, it's somewhere. It's floating.
Second time.
It's unclear. Well, I see you guys. I know. I'm starting to know some of these faces, right? But please sign in anyway. We have places for you to sign in, and I will see you on Monday. Thank you very much.